In 2003, Natalia Grace was born in the Ukraine. 5 years later, in 2008, she was sent to the United States of America, where she was adopted by a family called the Chiccones. A few months after that, she was adopted by yet another American family, the Barnetts. And shortly after the adoption, they accused Natalia of being a sociopathic adult posing as a child, wanting to kill her adoptive family. Natalia, who was born with dystrophic dwarfism, had an unusual appearance, and I think this was the basis for all of the abuse and exploitation and neglect that she suffered in the subsequent years. But among all of the outrageous allegations against the Barnetts, the most egregious one is that they successfully re-aged Natalia from 9 to 22. Hulu is now doing a TV series based on her story called Good American Family, with Ellen Pompeo playing the role of Christine, her adoptive mother. But I wanted to talk about the actual real case first, because here's the thing. The story has been sensationalized beyond belief. They have exploited Natalia's story to create this mystery where you go into the story not knowing if she's a child or if she's a grown-up pretending to be a child. Remember the movie Orphan in 2009? Well, turns out Christine was heavily inspired by that film to push these claims and get rid of her adopted daughter. There's a docuseries now with 3 seasons. This is insane. But the way the documentary tells her story is really frustrating, because half of the first season tells the story from the perspective of the Barnetts, with all of their allegations seemingly true. And then halfway through, there's this big plot twist where actually you find out the truth. But as I was peeling the layers of this toxic onion, I couldn't help but notice that the documentary was using Natalia and was using the nature of her case as a way to bring viewers in, to keep them guessing, to create these plot twists, these narratives that seem almost like a real-time movie or a real-time TV series, not a documentary. And it covers a wide range of topics, but mainly, trigger warning, child abuse, and a lot of ableism. And I have never felt so angry watching a documentary. I have never wanted to partake in physical violence as much as I did. I don't want to go into this leaving you wondering if she's a killer, if she's not, if she's an adult, if she's a child. I want you to know the real story from the get-go, because I think we've seen enough people try to sensationalize her life for drama, playing it out as if it's an episode of Real Housewives of whoever, where there's like a big twist and a big revelation. Enough of that. So here's the real story, very short summary before we go into the actual events and the allegations of abuse. Natalia Grace was born in September of 2003 in the Ukraine. And as soon as she was born, her mother was essentially coerced into giving her daughter up for adoption because she was born with dystrophic dwarfism. It's a type of dwarfism that affects all of her articulations, her spine, her feet, and basically the doctors told the mom, you're looking at $100,000 in surgeries minimum, and you're 24, you're super young, you should go live your life. And unfortunately, she gave the daughter away. She's then taken to the United States in 2008, 5 years later, and shortly after, she is adopted by the Chiccones, who probably saw in her an opportunity, because within months of getting her, they were already cruising Little People conventions to see if anyone wanted to adopt her. But she's eventually adopted in 2009 by the Barnetts in a closed adoption. The Barnetts already had 3 sons, and quickly after adopting Natalia, Christine Barnett, the mother, started claiming that Natalia was an adult who wanted to harm her family. And after years of mental, emotional, and physical abuse, Christine successfully got Natalia re-aged in court, legally changed her age from a 9-year-old to a 22-year-old. So after they successfully get her re-aged, they dump her in an apartment complex where she lives for a year. Then, once the lease is up, they dump her in another worse-off apartment complex and moved to Canada, leaving Natalia, a 9-year-old, legally 22, living on her own in a second-floor apartment with horrible accessibility for her condition. 5 days later, she meets Cynthia Mann, gets taken in, and 10 years later, she sues the Barnetts. But at its core, this is not a story of 2 parents who are scared to death of their foreign adopted daughter. This is a story of 2 horrible human beings who exploited, abused, and neglected a 9-year-old for their own gain, and got away with it. That's the most frustrating part, is knowing that in the end, both of them got away with it. But the docuseries interviews Michael Barnett. Christine refused to take part, and Michael gives 2 interviews, one in 2019 and one in 2022. And this man is the biggest I've ever seen in my life. He's got genuinely the most punchable face I have ever seen on my screen, and I don't think anything would give me more joy right now than to walk up to him and beat the living daylights out of him. But before we dive into the details, make sure to like this video, subscribe if you aren't already, and grab yourself a snack, get comfortable, get a drink, because there's a lot for us to cover, especially with all of the different reports of what happened and what didn't, all the different perspectives, all of the lies, especially. There's so many lies that are proven later on to be lies. And I'm going to be doing this in 2 parts. Part 1, I'm going to cover season 1, everything that happened to Natalia from her birth all the way up to 2022 when the court case happened. And then part 2 will come once Good American Family is all out, because I want to watch the series and I want to compare it to the documentary so we can see how much they've changed the story for dramatic effects and if they do Natalia justice. All I'm hoping is that Natalia Grace is being paid for them to be using her story. I truly hope that she's somehow had a way of influencing the narratives and the stories so they're more accurate to what actually happened. And now that my intro is 5 hours long, let's finally dive into the detailed events of Natalia's life. And we can all agree that boy bands are cringy as hell. Before they adopted Natalia, the Barnetts were already regionally known for how good they were with kids. Christine ran a program for kids with special needs. She would take care of them, she would look after them, and people had no complaints. They were the picture-perfect American family. They had 3 sons. Their oldest had been diagnosed with autism, but he was also a complete genius. I think he had a 60 minutes interview, so they were doing pretty well for themselves. Until they were contacted by an adoption agency in 2009 because they were familiar with Christine and Michael's work with kids, and they had this child up for adoption that could really use a couple that knew how to deal with these more delicate cases. So they had a closed adoption in 2009. Natalia is 6. That very same night, Christine is giving Natalia a bath and screams in horror because she sees that Natalia has full pubic hair down there. Days later, Natalia claims to Michael after he got home from work that she was hiding her period. And after speaking to a surgeon about the surgeries that she needed, he put them in touch with another family that had a 6-year-old daughter with exactly the same type of dwarfism that she had. And once they brought the 2 little girls together, Natalia looked older than the other child. Well, she was bigger. But the way that everyone talks about this discrepancy, they're talking about how Natalia looks like she's at least 18 or 20 years old, which is insane. Do you think this child looks 18 or 20? Shortly after, Christine and Michael claim that Natalia is violent, that she keeps stealing kitchen knives, hiding them under her bed. She tells them that she's going to kill them, that she wants to harm them. They also claim that she was teasing her brothers, like stealing their toys and then throwing the toys into oncoming traffic, hoping that the little kids would chase after the toys and get run over. These like insane allegations basically claiming that this 6-year-old is older than she looks because she has full pubic hair and is hiding her period. And also she's crazy because she wants to kill us all. They even got a doctor that diagnosed her a sociopath, and they start telling them that Natalia can't be trusted alone. She can't roam around the house freely. She has to basically be kept on a very tight leash. Then the pledge incident. One day, Natalia wakes up super happy, offers to help with washing the dishes. Christine leaves the kitchen for a little bit. She leaves her coffee mug in the kitchen, and when she comes back, there's a bottle of Pledge open next to the mug, and she takes a sip from her coffee, and all she can taste is Pledge. I don't know what Pledge is. I'm assuming it's a cleaning product, but this is enough for Christine to establish that Natalia wants to kill her. She's tried to poison her, to kill her. Then we have the creamery incident. The family went to this farm where you can milk cows, and there's an electric fence. And they tell the family, if you touch the fence, we're not going to be liable for any damage caused or any injury. And you have to sign these waivers. So they sign the waivers and they start walking along the creamery. And then Natalia pretty quickly, close to the fence, stops walking, starts complaining about the pain, needs to sit down. Christine, thinking of her youngest son, tells Michael to take their sons and keep walking, and she'll stay back with Natalia. And according to Michael, a few minutes after, he hears a scuffle, an altercation, and he turns back and he sees Natalia dragging Christine to the fence, trying to electrocute her. And just so you get an idea of how pathetic this man actually is, he says with a straight face, Natalia is really strong. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger, she uses her arms for everything, so she is a lot stronger than she looks. Mind you, this is a 6-year-old with dystrophic dwarfism, which means that her legs are bent weird, her spine is crumbling under her weight, her feet need special shoes for her to be able to walk comfortably, or she needs an operation that can fix her joints. This is a little girl in copious amounts of pain from a condition that she was born with. But instead of turning back and helping his wife, Michael keeps walking because Christine told him to keep walking. And then when he returned, the police was there. The police had been called, and they had taken Natalia for examination in a mental hospital because they looked at her and thought, we're not going to take her to jail. Especially because after the fact, the employees of the creamery said that Christine was the crazy hysterical one and she was making things so much worse and everything was blown out of proportion. And apparently, while she was in this mental hospital, the orderlies transferred her to an adult wing after seeing pubic hair and said that she was very inappropriate in her conversations, that she would often bring up sexual topics like it was nothing, very nonchalantly. She also started propositioning men for sex. And I just want you all to keep in mind that this is a 6-year-old whose adoptive mom at this point has been routinely abusing her and teaching her what to say and how to say for her to look crazy. But we'll get to that point in a second. Eventually, they release Natalia back to the Barnetts, and at this point, the neighbors are getting concerned, so they call Child Protective Services on them for them to investigate if anything's going on. Detective Heather Wilson investigates, finds Natalia's appearance strange, so she finds her original naturalization papers when Natalia was brought into the country in 2008. And when Natalia said that that was the age they told her at the orphanage she would have, they, I guess, assumed that this was a fake age and that she had been duped into thinking she was born in 2003. And according to Michael, the detective is the one who suggested they get her age corrected. But in order to do that, they would have to prove that her Ukrainian birth certificate was fake. So they do some digging and they find out that before they adopted Natalia, there were 2 other families who nearly adopted her. First up is Judith Irving, who is a little person. She was contacted by Little People of America because there was a couple that had a child with dwarfism looking for someone to adopt her. Unfortunately, she couldn't afford to adopt Natalia given how much surgery she would need in the future, so they couldn't take her in. But this queen does say that she finds Christine being afraid of Natalia incredibly silly and ridiculous because Christine is a person. Like, she is, compared to Natalia, Christine is like 5 times her size. Then we have Dwayne and Robin Ferris, a couple of Little People who also didn't adopt her because once they were approached by Little People of America again, they immediately asked them if they were going to be able to foot the bill for the surgeries that she had, plus the surgeries that she needed in the near future. And that was already like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So they also couldn't adopt her. But they did get weird vibes from Natalia and her adoptive mother at the time because it felt like everything was rehearsed and that Natalia was just reciting lines that she had been taught. And both couples claim that the allegations of Natalia being insane and a secret serial killer, an adult posing as a child, were absolutely ridiculous and unfounded. And this is when the age correction happened. So first, the police sent an email to Child Protective Services with pictures of Natalia entering the US, and 2 years later, in 2010, and they say they believe she is a child because in one picture she had baby teeth, very small, and then 2 years later, they were a bit more prominent. They also asked the Barnetts if they have a history of domestic violence. They say no. The police believe them, and turns out that was a lie. There were already reports with the police that there were domestic disputes and disturbances, but the police took them for their word and didn't investigate further. So at this point, we already have the police stating she is a child. But that didn't matter because by the end of 2012, the Barnetts filed a motion in Marion County Court to have her age corrected to something more appropriate. They used statements from her primary physician saying, yes, I think she could be older than her birth certificate says. And they use that as a basis for the whole case. And the judge agrees. The judge is like, okay, well, this is not scientific whatsoever. We don't have a way to determine, but if you're saying that she is a grown-up and her height hasn't changed from 2008 to 2012, then that means that she must have already been an adult in 2008. And the judge's logic is, if we stop growing at 18, let's say that she was at least 18 in 2008, that makes her 22 in 2012. So they actually age corrected her to be born in 1989 instead of 2003. Now, I want you to really think about what it would be like for a person born in 2003 to have your birthday changed to 14 years earlier. The interviewed people even say that age correction is not uncommon per se, but it's usually like a couple months or a year or two shaved off or added up. But to be 14 years should be criminal. It should be. We see an attorney arguing that back then there was enough credible evidence to re-age her 14 years and that nothing went wrong. You know, it's not their fault. They were just handling the evidence that they were given. And the evidence is that she hasn't grown much in the last 4 years and she could be older. So she gets a new birth certificate and an Indiana ID. They live in Indiana. And as soon as they do it, Christine and Michael get Natalia her own apartment in an apartment complex. A 9-year-old. They put a 9-year-old with dystrophic dwarfism who can barely walk, who can't reach the sink of the kitchen, who would probably struggle to get into a bathtub to shower. They put her living on her own. And this is when the saga of the neighbors of her Indiana apartment complex comes in. There was obviously this initial shock that she was actually 22 and not a child, because apparently Natalia would come up to anyone who was willing to hear her, introduce herself as, "Hi, I'm Natalia. I may look super young, but I'm actually 22 and I'm very dangerous. I've tried killing my family." And pretty quickly, the neighbors noticed that she was a bit unhygienic, she smelled, she always wore the same stuff. And seeing her live by herself and struggle to do anything, and seeing how her father drove a really nice car, they called CPS, Child Protective Services. In comes Heather Wilson, the same detective that responded to the call at the Barnetts. She goes from checking up on a 9-year-old to suddenly seeing her as a 22-year-old living on her own. I guess Heather spoke to Natalia a couple times because in the documentary we see videos that Michael took where he confronts Natalia. He grills her about what she told to Heather, what they talked about, what she wanted. He chastises her when he finds donuts in her kitchen, something that he didn't get her. So why the do you have donuts? And it's so frustrating to see this poor girl being grilled by a pathetic, small dick little man for having donuts in her house. For donuts. That's wild. Even wilder was Christine forcing Natalia to write a letter recanting all of her allegations about her family so that they wouldn't be seen as bad parents. Pretty quickly, Natalia starts crossing boundaries. She starts calling people and texting them all the time, showing up at their homes, asking them when they're going to be home. At times, she would even walk herself into other people's houses, and that caused some annoyances. You know, if you see this as a 9-year-old walking into your home, you may think, oh, okay, I mean, she doesn't know any better. She's a 9-year-old, right? But if you see a 22-year-old doing that, it's like, whoa, you get out of my house. Made even worse when Christine would force Natalia to call the cops on herself. Natalia would call the cops and say, "I am a danger to others. I'm stalking my neighbors and I'm having bad thoughts about doing bad things to them." Pretty soon she starts making inappropriate sexual comments to her neighbors as well, especially to men, propositioning them. And again, I want to remind you that this is a 9-year-old who's been taught to say these things, so she's seen as a grown-up and not as just a child. And it was really sick listening to the neighbors talk about her physical appearance and talking about her breasts and how she's so mature and how she has to be at least 25 years old. Really, Indiana? Is this what you consider a 25-year-old? She would also play with other kids in the neighborhood, and there was an incident where she was rolling up and down a hill with a kid, like a 10 or 11-year-old kid, and I guess she reached down for his private parts, and his father caught her and just, like, caused a massive scene. So Natalia was now a pariah in that apartment complex, so a year after moving in, her lease was up and they decided not to renew her contract because pretty much everyone wanted her gone. So after the lease was not renewed, they decided to house hunt in a different county. They had been living in Westville, Indiana up until this point, but with so many calls to CPS, to police, with so many stories about Natalia, they were pretty much well known in the county. So they looked for an apartment in Lafayette, Indiana. They find a centralized apartment, which they claim was very close to the bus stop, to grocery stores, to adult GED centers, etc. Because yeah, she signed up at the age of 10 to take her GED. I'm not American, but isn't GED like the high school diploma equivalent that you take when you don't do high school? I'm struggling to understand how an able-bodied 9-year-old could survive in these circumstances, let alone Natalia. And though Michael tried to frame this apartment as being very well centralized, the neighbors of Natalia pretty quickly said that actually that area was horrible to live in. You couldn't walk safely anywhere. There was a lot of drug use, a lot of homelessness, a lot of vagrants, a lot of crime, a lot of violence, and they put Natalia in a second floor apartment. She had to climb a bunch of stairs. Her neighbor said that pretty much on the first or second day, Natalia showed up at her doorstep asking if she had any food. There's even texts between Michael and Christine talking about how they're going to wipe out her contact list so she can't call anyone for help. And again, a small child with dwarfism dumped in a second floor apartment with no accessibility. She couldn't reach the counter in the kitchen. She couldn't reach the bathtub. She basically couldn't do anything on her own. She didn't have anyone's phone. She didn't have any friends, no family members. But this is not the worst part. They put her in Lafayette, Indiana, as they were planning to move to Canada because their son, Jacob, the prodigy, had gotten a scholarship to study at a really hoity-toity institute, whatever. It's like a super special program. So they moved their entire family to Ontario, Canada, and they left Natalia, the 10-year-old, by herself in Lafayette, Indiana. Pretty shortly after, Natalia goes missing and shows up a few days later. She met a woman called Cynthia Mann, who was married to Antoine Mann, this couple that had several foster kids. And Cynthia, meeting Natalia, she was like, actually, I can't let you stay here on your own. This is actually insane and dangerous. Come with me. I'll give you food, I'll take care of you. And 3 days later, Natalia moved in with them. A few days after that, Cynthia got Natalia to switch her social security to Cynthia rather than the Barnetts. And she was also evicted from her second floor apartment pretty quickly. The Barnetts, however, couldn't do anything about any of it because legally, Natalia was already of age. In 2014, Michael and Christine get a divorce. Michael moves back to the United States, but Christine stays in Canada with her 3 sons. The separation is not amicable at all. There was like a lot of animosity between these two. And then between 2014 and 2019, there's some investigation into the Barnetts and what they may or may not have done to Natalia Grace. There's a detective, Davenport, who starts investigating this in 2019, and this is when it all kind of starts falling apart. And at this point, Natalia had been living with the Manns for about 5 years. The detective visits Michael in 2019, where Michael admits that he believes Natalia to be like 20, 22 right now, which would mean that she was a minor when they left her in Indiana. And finally, charges are filed for child neglect against Michael and against Christine. And this is when the 2022 interview of Michael Barnett happens, because up until this point, he has been very much on the narrative of Natalia was fooling us all. She was dangerous. We were scared for our lives. We didn't know what to do. We are so traumatized. We, the parents, are the real victims in this story. We were played as fools by a child, I guess. And he is so pathetic telling his story, the way he just goes at, he tells the story in a very dramatic way, almost as if he's on TV, and he's trying to make this a big moment, like a gotcha. See, you thought it was Natalia, but it was actually my wife. My wife was the villain all along. He's now claiming that there was so much mental engineering done on him by Christine that it was impossible to break free. And he just loses his mind trying to frame this narrative as Christine is to blame for everything, and I'm just another victim. And he goes into detail about the abuse that Natalia suffered at the hands of Christine, including oftentimes Christine would ask Natalia to write down all of the names of all the people that she had known previously because she was so convinced that Natalia was an adult posing as a child. And if Natalia was uncooperative, she would force her to stand very close against a wall all day. She was not allowed to move all day to the point where she would pee herself and soil herself. Christine wouldn't feed her. She would tell her, you can eat as soon as you give us all of the names. You can enjoy family time as soon as you give us the names. Michael also claims that Christine was heavily physically abusive towards Natalia. He does this ridiculous, pathetic recreation. I'm sorry, I'm gonna call this man pathetic so many times because there's no bad words that will do him justice. Christine would beat her to a pulp with a belt. And because Natalia had a habit of peeing herself or soiling herself, which is probably due to the fact that she would force her to stand against a wall all day without moving, Christine forced their oldest son, Jacob, to pee in Natalia's bed as revenge. He's such a gross little man. He really thinks that people are going to feel sympathy after hearing this interview. He really thinks that he's coming across as a nice guy and not as the biggest piece of shit we've ever met. He's surprised that Natalia's body didn't break into 1,000 pieces with how many beatings she got from Christine. We also speak to Jacob, the prodigy, who is now a sad looking human being who has been heavily traumatized by his parents' actions, and he's struggling to speak freely. You can tell that he doesn't want to incriminate his mother. And we hear a conversation we weren't supposed to. They forgot they were mic'd, Michael and his son, and we hear an event about someone kicking someone down the stairs and how they're not going to talk about that event. And we then hear Natalia in 2019 in an interview saying that the Barnetts allowed their sons to beat her up. And I think that could be the staircase incident, that one of the kids just beat her up too much and pushed her down the stairs. I don't have words to express how horrific this sounds, how horrific it feels to imagine a child living in these conditions and being villainized for the way she looks, for the way she was born. It's evil. Like, I don't even understand how you can quantify or determine the amount of evil and it's I just took a break to scream into a pillow because here comes the big fuckery. Okay, in this 2022 interview, Michael claims to have been sexually abused by Christine, not by having his body physically violated, but by being used as a tool. I'll explain. She would withhold affection, would never call him attractive, leading him to get addicted to porn. And then when he left Canada, when they separated, she would use sex as a weapon. She would sext him. She would tease him with naughty pics. I'm not knocking anyone's kinks. I am, however, knocking this kinks because she deserves to burn in hell. But to say that you've been sexually abused by Christine because she would withhold affection and would sext you is actually insane. As for the charges, first, Michael and Christine were charged separately because of the amount of allegations that Michael gave Detective Davenport in their 2019 interview. So they thought that if they charged him separately, they could maybe have more success. I don't know how the law works. All I know is a lot of times it doesn't. So prosecution filed separate charges, one for neglect of a child and one for neglect of a disabled person. Davenport even calls the physician, Dr. McLaren, the one that Christine used his depositions to convince the judge to re-age Natalia. And when confronted with that reality, with the fact that his deposition was used to convince the judge, he's like, well, I only agreed with Christine that she may be a bit older, but that was mostly based on claims that Christine had made of her behavior at home. Like, Christine convinces the physician that she may be older, and then uses that as fact for the judge to make her 14 years older illegally. It's insane. Do you understand how up the judiciary system has to be for someone to be re-aged like this with no evidence, really? There's really no evidence. They didn't do any DNA tests. They analyzed her bones and her teeth, and they determined that she was a child, but somehow that never made it into the courtroom, so they just made her an adult, and that's it. But there's worse. At this point, the prosecutors and Detective Davenport travel to the Ukraine to track down Natalia's birth mother, and they do. Her name is Anna Gava, and they get a DNA sample from her, which shows that she is indeed the biological mother and that Natalia was indeed born in 2003. They prove, beyond shadow of a doubt, that Natalia is biologically 19 in 2022, yet legally she's 33. And this is when Anna tells us that when Natalia was born, the doctors were very quick to tell her, you're still young, you're only 24, you have so much to live for, she's going to need so many surgeries, she's going to be a small person anyway with a lot of difficulties, you don't need this in your life, just here's 5 waivers, sign them all, and we'll take care of the rest. Following a subpoena of Christine's Facebook, we find out that she had been sexting many men before they even adopted Natalia, so she had a habit of cheating on Michael, which is fine because he's a piece of shit, so they both deserve copious amounts of unhappiness thrown at them. We also find out that Christine sought out the advice of a little person online, a conversation that quickly turned sexual. She was messaging him nonstop, trying to seduce him, and we later find out that she tried to pimp Natalia. She tried to fix him up with her child. This is so sick. Okay, here's the worst part of it all, and legally speaking, I don't understand why or how. I'm not privy to the intricacies of the American judiciary system. Never met it. Don't plan to. Despite the DNA evidence, the judge's ruling was that age could not be mentioned in the trial, which means that for the charges of neglect of a child, can't go ahead because she was legally an adult. Even if DNA evidence now shows that she was a minor, they couldn't use that. And they also couldn't use her age in the charges about neglecting a person with a disability. So they were all hoping that the jury would find Michael guilty of neglecting a person with a disability. Because even if Natalia was 22 at the time, what they did was criminal, to just dump her in a home with nothing. Not enough food, not a phone, no way to cook food, to wash herself, to do anything because a child. We then see Michael and his lawyers in a room arguing their case, like practicing, talking about her as an adult and just going through all of these angles of how are we gonna bury this child that our client abused and neglected for years. They even show a video of her when she had been recently adopted running across the road as if this proves that she was able to take care of herself all along. It's so disgusting to hear. Like, there's something really nasty about lawyers who, I get it, they have to do their job, they have to defend whoever they're chosen to represent, regardless if they're guilty or innocent. But there's something so twisted, being aware that this was a child, biologically speaking, but you still have to show that your client didn't abandon her and come up with these arguments that paint a literal child as the devil. Like, I don't know, watching this documentary really, really wrecked the very little faith that I have in people. It completely wrecked it. It was also frustrating to see that all of the neighbors that were speaking about how she was so creepy and inappropriate and annoying and obnoxious, pretty much all of them said, if this was a child, obviously I would intervene and help. If this was a child, the story would be completely different. If I had known she was a child, I would have done something. Everyone has the same conclusion. If we knew she was a child, we would have helped her. But no one bothered to ask enough questions about it. No one bothered to investigate enough into it. Everyone was just kind of happy to be like, you know what? It's sad, but it's none of my business. I'm not going to meddle. I'm not going to try and help someone who might be in dire need of assistance. And even without being able to use her age as evidence, there were still all the testimonies of the neighbors. There was pictures, a video of Christine saying that Lafayette was a white trash town and that no one was going to care. Nothing works. Natalia was forced to talk about her disability and talk about herself as if her birthday was in 1989. And she was also heavily criticized for not remembering certain details from 2010, 2009, 2011, 2012, which again, to remind the audience, she was a child. If I ask you stuff that happened when you were 8 or 9 specifically, you're not gonna probably know all the details, especially if you've had as much trauma as this child has had. But yeah, she was criticized because she couldn't remember some of the details. Therefore, her testimonies had some conflicting statements in it. Of course, if you presume that she was 22 at the time and now at 33 she can't remember, of course it's going to be shady. It's going to be suspicious. And after 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Michael not guilty. And we then see a couple of jurors saying after that they found out her real age after the verdict, They walked out of that courtroom, found out that they were fooled, they weren't given enough evidence, and they all say if we had known that she was a child, he would have been guilty. And we all actually feel really bad about the verdict. And a year later, the charges against Christine were dropped, which means that Michael and Christine Barnett effectively got away with all the abuse, despite mountains of evidence pointing to their guilt. As for Natalia Grace, after moving in with Cynthia and Antoine in 2014, she stayed with them for the next 10 years. Unfortunately, this was not the happy ending that she expected, but we'll save that for part 2. All you need to know for now is that Natalia is alive and well and really trying to rebuild her life. And that is the end of part 1 of probably the most horrific story that I've ever heard in a documentary. I don't understand how this could have gotten so far out of hand. I don't understand how they could get away with so much. And as for you, make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments down below if you're watching Good American Family. What are your initial thoughts? Without spoilers, are they playing in Natalia's face like the documentary did, or are they actually doing her justice? I'm trying to avoid all promotional materials and teasers until the whole season is out, which will take another 3 weeks, I think. But yeah, until then, just give me a little amuse-bouche of what's to come, because I've never been so invested in a real case, a real crime case like this. And truly, after everything that I've seen, I genuinely just hope that Natalia is able to find happiness. Natalia was robbed of choice from the moment she was born. Everyone else determined how her life would go, except for her. Everyone had a say in what she would do except for her. And that's insane. And thank you for tuning in, for keeping me company up until this point. I truly, genuinely appreciate all the love and support that I've gotten in the last few videos, so thank you. It has not gone unnoticed. Almost forgot, next video, I'm gonna do a White Lotus review. I'm gonna binge season 3 now that everything is finally out, and yeah, I can't wait. And I hope you can't either. And until then, stay safe, stay sane, stay stupid, stay stuttering. Bye, guys.